Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss conclusions I've drawn from studying American history. It's really a survey, not really deep, but it does talk about things that we should all know about to discuss, to be able to be conversant in American history. Um, and much deeper if there's a subject you're interested in. So let me begin. We're in World War II. As in the Civil War and World War I, Americans were drafted into the military. The World War II draft actually began in 1940. Military service in time of war had become a responsibility of all able bodied men until 1973, although the selective service system stopped registering young men in 1975. That registration was reinstituted in 1980, and recently, Democrats have even insisted upon the return of the draft to prepare us for future wars, as an all volunteer army is only suitable for defense of the nation, not offensive wars. In 1942, Japanese Americans were interred in concentration camps. Well, I say that our all volunteer army did well on a small scale in recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. However, if we had a huge war with an opponent that was capable of invading our shores, I guarantee you that we would need to reinstitute the draft. Okay, that a volunteer army would not be suitable for such an event. Um, in 1942, Japanese Americans were interred in concentration camps on the West Coast. A stunned America turned from wanting nothing to do with foreign problems to gearing up full for the fight ahead. Food rationing was placed into effect along with gas and even clothing. Slowly, the Great Depression was ended by the full employment needed to support the troops we sent to war. Ration books were issued, and such things as, quote, Meatless Tuesdays and Victory Gardens became hallmarks of the American sacrifice to win the war, fought on two fronts against two formidable enemies, the Germans in Europe and the Japanese in the Pacific. Excuse me. America, having suffered the loss of Guam and the Philippines, battled back in the Pacific in battles detailed in Samuel Eliot Morrison's 15-volume work, The History of the United States Naval Operations in World War II. American and native forces were slaughtered in their surrender in the Philippines in the Bataan Death March. American servicemen fought and died heroically on Guam. To show Japan we meant business, General Doolittle led a long range bombing raid on Japan and crashed in China in April. In June of 1942, just 1 month after the inconclusive Battle of the Coral Sea, the United States and Japan fought the Battle of Midway, and the U.S., overcoming unbelievable odds, won an heroic battle at sea that was the turning point in the war. General Douglas MacArthur led forces in the Pacific in an island hopping strategy that reduced Japanese strongholds one by one. Historic battles and campaigns such as Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa marked the bloody reducing of the Japanese power in the Pacific. Excuse me again. American troops in North Africa, after disastrous defeat at the Kasserine Pass, were led by General George S. Patton, who then proceeded to lead his troops into Sicily and Italy, pushing back the Axis powers as part of the Allied powers, including Great Britain. Historic battles such as Anzio marked America's sacrifice in that theater. Finally, troops under General Dwight David Eisenhower with Allied forces invaded Hitler's, quote, Fortress Europe on June 6, 1944, in what has come down to us as D Day. Bitter fighting continued as Allied troops took Europe from Hitler mile by bloody mile. Daytime and nighttime bombing raids on Germany's industrial centers and cities wreaked destruction in the Axis homeland. Still, Hitler's minions managed to murder 6 million Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, and mentally retarded people. The vast majority of the dead were Jews, marked for extermination as part of the Nazis' final solution for the Jewish race. Knowing that Soviet Russia, who without our supplies would have perhaps not survived the Nazi juggernaut, was going to be a force to contend with in deciding what would happen after Hitler's inevitable defeat, an increasingly sick FDR met in early 1945 with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin of Russia at the Yalta Conference. FDR capitulated on Stalin's demands for Eastern Europe, hoping that the communists would participate in the successor to the League of Nations called the United Nations, the charter of which had been drawn up the year before at the Dumbarton Oaks Conference headed by Alger Hiss, who would later be convicted of being a spy for the Soviet Union. FDR, who had been paralyzed from the waist down since 1921 due to what may have been polio, was not well and died of a massive cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945. The war was not quite over. FDR had led the nation, right or wrong, whatever you think of him, for the longest period of any president. We're going to stop there and we'll pick it up with Truman's administration and some other additional comments next time. Thank you for listening. Sorry about the sun. When you start late in the day, this is what happens. So I hope you'll study American history and dig deep for topics that interest you. Come to your own conclusions. Thank you for listening.